Great. It is 12:02, everyone. We're going to get started. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Stephen Ponce, and I'm the Director of Parent and Family Communication and Engagement. You've probably received an email or two from me in the past or have attended a previous webinar, but my role is really to engage with all of you throughout the year and then partner with campus colleagues like Kristen, who will be presenting you today. Um, Before we get started, I'm going to put on the screen just real quick our Zoom etiquette for the day. Your mics are currently muted, um, and they'll be turned on during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If possible, please use the Q&A feature to submit any questions that you may have. It helps us keep it organized a little bit better, but the chat function is there as well. If you don't see the Q&A button, it's under the More dropdown, and you can access it there. The webinar is being recorded, and the link will be shared later this week with everyone on the call. And then just a quick note, many of you have already done this, which means you've attended a webinar in the past. There's no need to be on camera. Feel free to sit back, relax, and enjoy the session. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen.
Good afternoon and welcome. Today I'm just going to be doing a brief presentation on mental health, why it's important, common issues that students are facing today in the college setting, and then ways that we can best support them. And then, of course, as Stephen mentioned, feel free to ask any questions during the Q&A portion. Give me just one moment while I share my screen. Okay. Alrighty. So, why is mental health important? Well, did not mean for that to go forward. There we go. 1 in 5 US adults experience mental illness each year, and all of your students are now adult aged or will be very soon if they are not 18 yet. 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by age 14 and 75% by age 24. So by the time they exit Santa Clara, they will fall within that age range. And our mental health, emotional health, and physical health are all inextricably connected. And so we want to be sure that these are not things that we're allowing to just fall to the wayside. People with depression have a 40% higher risk of developing cardiovascular and metabolic diseases than the general population. So it's also a good time to be sure that we're checking in and checking in often. Ultimately, it is our mental health that creates the personal reality that we live in. And that is something that we remind our students of while they're here. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. It's one of our favorite quotes by Jane Goodall. And we talk about this ripple effect while each of our mental health might be a personal inner experience. It creates a ripple effect on our community and the people that we love. And so, whether that's, family, friends, your roommate, there's certainly a ripple effect when it comes to mental health. And that's also something that we remind our students of. Here at Santa Clara, you'll hear us talk a lot about the 8 dimensions of wellness. And so, when thinking about where to kind of start with checking in on ourselves with mental health, it starts with the self. I cannot pour from an empty cup, and so daily personal check-ins are essential. A quick acronym that we teach is HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. How can I be sure that my personal needs are being met first? And then how can I fill my cup? What brings me ease, joy, purpose? What might be some of my go-to self-care activities, and what dimensions of wellness are they supporting? And so some of our students love to take advantage of the free workout classes at the gym, and so that's tapping into the physical. Others might join the philosophy or psychology club on campus and tap into that intellectual piece. Some take care of themselves through the work that they do here on campus. Maybe it's at the Markula Center for Ethics. Others might tap into the spiritual component, and maybe it's through getting involved in campus ministry or going to the Sunday night mass, which is the most popular time for our students to go, is the late night mass. There's a variety of ways to be sure that we're checking in and doing self-care. I think sometimes students just need to be reminded of what those resources are. So some signs of mental health challenges, they could be pretty wide-ranging and they're not always straightforward, but we can recognize them. It might look like appearing withdrawn or extreme sadness for more than a couple of weeks, increased risk-taking behavior like excessive use of alcohol or other substances. Maybe you're seeing some severe shifts or mood swings or just crippling fear for no particular reason, significant weight loss or weight gain. And then, of course, seeing, hearing, or believing things that aren't real. This is a way that students can help one another. However, it's also a great way for parents to be able to help their student. Utilizing the difference between judgment and curiosity, um, it's really important to listen with the intent to understand versus listening with the intent to respond. And your student can gauge when someone is doing that. And oftentimes there's more of an openness if that listening is to truly just understand versus responding. Meeting the student where they are, being sure that we're modeling behavior, using their own experience and what's helped them. Offering open lines of communication that respects personal boundaries. There might be a limit to what a student wants to talk about in that moment. And sometimes it's okay to just leave that door open. And then, of course, referring if necessary. There is not an expectation that another student or parents, even, or clinicians. And so, if there's additional help that might be needed, referring them to one of the on campus resources would be great. Students with anxiety. So, anxiety can be a normal response to a perceived danger or threat to one's well being. It occurs on a spectrum ranging from mild worry to crippling fear. Mild worry might be something like, oh, I'm a little bit stressed out about this test and my hands are clammy. The crippling fear would be like, I cannot go to this class today because I will pass out if I have to take this exam. So, anxiety becomes a concern when it's out of proportion to the stressor or causes difficulties in the student's ability to function and just do day to day things. Signs can include rapid heart rate, chest pain, dizziness, sweating, shaking, or clammy hands. Students might struggle with concentration, decision making, or just having clarity with their thoughts. So, here are some things that we do when we are seeing a student with anxiety. Let the student discuss their feelings and their thoughts. Often, this alone relieves a great deal of pressure. Providing validation. I hear how worried you are. Linking them to professional resources. Let me give you some information about CAPS 24/7. Or CAPS provides crisis appointments from 10 to 3 daily. Talking slowly and remaining calm is a big one. Students are going to pick up on the energy that we're giving off. And so if we're hyped up, then they will remain hyped up as well. Inviting the student to take slow, deep breaths with you. A sample breathing metaphor is smell a cower for that deep inhale and then blow out a candle for a longer exhale. Providing a safe and quiet environment is also crucial. Things that we don't want to do. We don't want to minimize the perceived threat to which the student is reacting. And so it is not going to be helpful to be like, that does not sound like a big deal, because to them in that moment, it is a big deal. Taking responsibility for the student's emotional state. It is not our responsibility to take on how they're feeling, but it is helpful to be able to walk alongside them. Overwhelming the student with too many questions, information, or ideas to fix their anxiety. There normally isn't, a magic wand that can be waved to make anxiety go away. And so I think if we have appropriate expectations around it not being something that goes away entirely immediately, and maybe something that just we progressively work on, that's going to be the most helpful. Students with depressive symptoms. So, sadness is a part of natural emotional and physical response to life's ups and downs. Energy levels, social battery, and moods all naturally shift and go up and down over time. Many students will experience periods of reactive or just situational depression during college. When I say situational, maybe a student went through a breakup recently. Well, maybe I wouldn't say that they are depressed, like I wouldn't diagnose them with that, but I would say that they are experiencing situational depression. Or maybe a student's having a really rough time adjusting to being in a new environment. That doesn't mean that they are clinically depressed. It might mean that they're experiencing some situational depression, and there are some ways to address that. However, if they go on for a longer period of time, depressive symptoms can become extreme and interfere with the student's ability to function both academically or socially. Some signs of a student who could be depressed might include some changing moods, isolation, I would say like more extreme isolation, missing events, missing class, and a reduction of personal hygiene. Students experiencing depression often benefit from validation, even if the interactions are brief. And intervening early is going to be crucial here. We do want to let the student know that a shift has been noticed and that we're here to help. We do want to reach out and encourage the student to discuss their feelings. We absolutely want to offer resources to further investigate and manage depressive symptoms, like referring them to CAPS or our counseling center is going to be great. And then normalizing discussing suicide as a potential symptom of depression by asking the question, have you thought of harming yourself? We do not want to minimize the student's feelings, even if it's well-intentioned. So telling someone that there isn't a reason to worry and everything will be okay tomorrow, when that may not be true for them, is not going to be helpful. We do not want to bombard the student with fix-it solutions or advice, especially if the student did not ask. It will be more helpful to just listen than to try and give blanket advice that, may not apply to them. It's not a one size fits all kind of situation. And we don't want to criticize a student for poor or incomplete work. If a student is struggling to just even get out of bed, it probably isn't a realistic expectation that they're going to be performing at, the optimum level academically. And so getting to the root of the problem, trying to meet them where they are, and then offering the resources would all be more helpful than criticizing them in that moment. We talk a lot with our students about setting personal boundaries. And so boundaries are how we tolerate our interactions. They are limits of what we give to others and what we receive from others. And it applies to all aspects of our person, physically, mentally, financially, and spiritually. Part of why clear boundaries are so important is because they help prevent harm to ourselves and harm to others, as well as indicating how we could be helpful to others. So, clear boundaries are going to require clear communication. And that's something that we certainly work on with the students here, especially because boundary setting might be something new for them entirely. However, I think the reframing of boundaries being an act of love and self-care for both ourselves and others helps make that a little bit more digestible. Now, for QPR, that stands for question, persuade, and refer. It is okay to ask the question. I think oftentimes people are afraid of asking, are you thinking about harming yourself? Are you thinking about ending your life? However, another sign of mental health decline is indirect or direct signs of suicidal ideation. And with it being the third leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds, that is certainly something that we do not want to just avoid talking about. You might hear some direct verbal cues like I'm thinking about ending my life or I wish I were dead. Or you also might hear some that are more indirect, like I just wish I wasn't here or I'm too tired to do this anymore. Um, Sometimes there's behavioral clues like giving away prized possessions or really risky behavior, sudden loss of jobs or friends or schooling because maybe they've already just started to withdraw and check out. It is a myth that asking someone about suicide, increases their risk of suicide. Asking shows that you care and persuading that individual to get the help that they need and referring them to professional help is often what is helpful in being more preventative. So here at SCU, there's a lot of community support, and then there's also support beyond Santa Clara. And so for individuals struggling with adjustment, connection, and mental health overall at Santa Clara, the Wellness Center is great. It's a little bit I'd say like there's less of a stigma around the wellness center because it's not actively therapy. And so sometimes it's a good first step because there's wellness coaching that's offered. There's confidential student survivor advocacy people for them to work with. There's different meetings, and different students that they can work with, whether it's a peer health educator or a violence prevention educator, and they are also confidential. And so sometimes it might be easier to talk peer to peer. Um, and so there's information for the Wellness Center if you wanted to contact them there. I know Stephen's going to be sending out these slides, so you'll also have this for um, your own usage. However, there's also counseling and psychological services if there's a student that's ready to make that step and engage in therapy. And so at CAPS, we offer short-term individual couples and group brief therapy. Brief is a relative term. There are students that I've seen for one session, there's students that I've seen for 5 sessions, and there's students that are seniors this year that I've been seeing since at some point their freshman year on a bi-weekly basis. So it really just depends on what the student needs. Um, we do not have session fees and we do not have session limits because we do not want that to dissuade students from going. And so there are urgent and crisis appointments available Monday through Friday at 10, 11, 1, 2, and 3. That would be for someone that's like, I'm on the brink of disaster and I need to talk to someone right now who, doesn't really know where to turn to. That's where you want to use those kinds of appointments. While we see people for a variety of things, we do not offer, but will refer out for the things that you see listed on the right. So let's say someone is like addicted to cocaine or something like that. We would not be able to see them regularly at CAPS because that requires like a different level of care. However, we do have a case manager that would connect them with the appropriate resources. And she would be sure that who she was connecting them with was accepted by whatever insurance provider the student had. Um, we won't be able to see someone for court mandated assessments or treatment. That is something that they would have to do outside of Santa Clara. However, once again, we would still help them get connected. If they needed more like inpatient care because they had a very severe eating disorder, those are the kinds of things that we would still refer out. However, coming to CAPS if they're needing help getting connected would still be a really great first step. So here are the therapists in residence. What I love about this is we both live and work in the residence halls, and so Justin lives in Finn and serves Finn and Sobrato, and he also serves the substance-free wing in Magis. He lives, even though he lives in Finn, his office is in Casa. So the Casa students often will book appointments with Justin as well. I live in the villas and have an office here in the villas. I also serve Graham and have an office there, and I serve Campisi and San Filippo and have an office in Campisi. Anyone that lives in San Filippo also has access to the Campisi building with their access card, and so it just helps make things a bit more accessible. Melba lives in Casa, has an office in McLaughlin Walsh, and serves Swig and McLaughlin Walsh and Nobley. And Mitch lives in McLaughlin Walsh and serves Dunn and Casa and has an office in Dunn. All four of us will see people from any community if they want. However, it is helpful for students to know that there's a face to the name for a therapist that they might be seeing more frequently because of where we have offices, and where we're doing our programming. And so we support and address the overall mental health needs of undergraduate students who live on campus. It definitely serves as an extension of CAPS, even though we all also see clients on a biweekly basis the same way that a CAPS therapist would. We're just a bit more integrated in the community. We also work during Regulus business hours and later appointments. And so all of us offer hours at some point during the week that maybe are during the lunch hour where CAPS is normally closed from 12 to 1, or in the evenings because we know that some of our students, are both students and work, or maybe they're students that are overloading and have labs that go later into the evening. And so we offer kind of more like untraditional hours. And then we also offer different workshops on various topics throughout the year, whether that be grief or mindfulness, stress management. just kind of based on whatever the needs of that particular residential learning community are. And students can make an appointment by just logging into their health center portal. It's pretty easy to do, and they could even do that for the same day as long as it's at least 2 hours before the slot. Um, they could do same day, next day, same week. And if they do not like the health center portal, they can also email us, even though the health center portal is going to have live availability for right that second. And so that's always the most accurate. Although I would say about half of my appointments so far this school year have been booked via email. So we're certainly flexible, or as flexible as we can be. Here are some of the groups that are offered at CAPS. On the left side, you will see, you know, a lot of groups that are offered, and these are always changing based on the needs of the university. And so, for example, understanding self and others is not offered every single quarter. It's just offered based on the requests that we get, whereas difficult families is offered every quarter, body liberation is offered every quarter, BIPOC support and empowerment is offered every quarter. SCQ at SCU is offered every quarter. But the rest of these can kind of be swapped in and out for other groups that might, have a need that particular quarter. And then these workshops are currently being offered this quarter. Um, I would say three of these are offered every quarter, multiple times a quarter, and then the other two kind of switch in and out based on campus need. Making an appointment is pretty simple. You can call or stop by the health center Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 5. Appointments are available from 9 to 4. And then, like I said before, the student health portal can just be used for therapist and residence appointments. Our case manager, Jessica, is outstanding. She's going to be the person that we use to connect students with on and off campus referrals. So, for example, I had a student earlier today actually that needed a referral for getting a transfer to psychiatric care for ADHD meds because she's from out of state. And so, even though I will still be able to help her with the therapy portion, I cannot help with the getting meds prescribed portion, or like I don't prescribe meds. And so I set her up with an appointment with Jessica, and Jessica has connected with her to ensure that she's getting meds that she needs through a psychiatrist that's based in California. And so Jessica is kind of our little guardian angel over at the health center. And then last but not least, you will, or CAPS 24/7, as you'll hear us call it, is also a resource that students have access to 24 hours a day, even if they're not on Santa Clara's campus, as long as they are a Santa Clara student, they can connect with someone at any time, by calling this number, and they will be connected within, usually the wait time is no longer than 90 seconds, to a licensed clinician that can help them either for one-time therapy or for ongoing therapy. You will, or CAPS 24/7 is also a good option for someone that's maybe thinking that they need to see someone more than every other week. If they want to see someone once or twice a week, that is something that you will is willing to do. And it's also free and incorporated into the no cost, no session limits model that CAPS has. Okay. I will pause there for questions.
Great. You all now have the ability to unmute yourself and ask any questions that you might have. Um, if there are none, I do have a list that I will kind of go through to kind of get us kicked off and to get addressed in an open space. But to start, Kristen, over the last 5 weeks, we've noticed a spike in roommate related issues, as students are transitioning to live with someone new for the first time. Um, issues that could involve, suite mates having friends over late or roommates with opposite sleeping schedules and habits. Is there any advice that you could provide to parents to support their students in this adjustment to sharing a space with someone new?
Absolutely. First, I want to validate that sharing a space with someone new is not always easy. I still remember what it was like sharing a space here on campus, and I had never shared a room with anyone before moving to Santa Clara for undergrad. I think that something that's important is for our students to not be afraid to communicate with one another. And one of the best ways to do that is by being sure that they fill out the roommate agreement. Every student was given a roommate agreement or a suite mate agreement to kind of discuss what works for them, kind of identify what those non-negotiables are, and ways to just be a bit more respectful of sharing the space. Something that I think is really important is reminding your student that there is a difference between feeling uncomfortable versus feeling unsafe. So something that might be uncomfortable would be my roommate freshman year, and she and I are actually still great friends. We talk almost every day. She definitely went to bed a lot earlier than I did, and she's just someone that required a lot more sleep. Like she was not functioning with less than 8 or 9 hours of sleep. And at 18, I could get 5 hours and feel sprite and lively. And so I knew that it wasn't going to work for me to have guests in our room, like friends from our floor, after 10:30 max 11 p.m. And what that meant was that the compromise was me going to the lounge or going and hanging out in friends' rooms that did have later hours. And that was something that we discussed and that was in our roommate agreement. Another thing that was helpful for her, was sleeping with an eye mask because she was sensitive to light. And so if I'm coming in the room late at night, even if I'm being quiet, just maybe the light from the hallway was disruptive. But I can't control the lights in the hallway, but we can control her eyes being covered. Or little earplugs, if you're sensitive to noise, or a sound machine can also be really helpful. Um, but the most important thing is at least giving it a go with having a conversation with your roommates and suite mates with that roommate or suite mate agreement. If that is not successful, having your student reach out to their community facilitator is going to be crucial because the CFs are quite used to helping mediate some of those roommate conflicts. And if the CFs are unable to do it, they can continue to call up. There's assistant resident directors, there's resident directors who are capital A adults that can also help with some of these issues. And something that I would also say is reminding your student that if they do request a room change, they would be then joining a room of someone else whose roommate moved out. And so something that is worth asking yourself is, well, why did this other person's roommate move out? Like what was maybe going on for them to feel like they wanted to move out? And so I would say engaging in conflict resolution skills is often going to be a better bet than moving, especially because in moving, you're not guaranteed a spot in your same residential learning community. And so, let's say your student lives in Sobrado and really loves the culture there. Maybe the only other empty spot is in a room across campus with an entirely different culture and perhaps not having access to like the friends that they've made that are within their community already. So those are all things that we talk through students with. However, if they are in a situation where they're unsafe, for example, maybe their roommate is engaging in really risk-taking behavior, like drug use or um, maybe having strangers over and a variety of different kinds of guests or sleeping over overnight without permission and things like that. Those are things that would be classified as unsafe, and you definitely would want to loop one of the people in residence life in about those issues so they could be addressed. And then if they aren't rectified, talking to housing about a room change.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. This one you can see in the chat. I'm just going to rephrase it so we can kind of get to the heart of what's being asked. So we talked a little about dealing with roommates and the whole housing situation, but what if there's anxiety on the academic front? Do you have any suggestions on ways that parents can be encouraging to their student to, share all of these resources and to really advise them to seek help where they need it, without feeling like, they're pressing them to do it, without saying, hey, you should go do this, right?
Yes, yes, yes. Um, I actually was able to read from Kristen, also Kristen, great name. Um, I was able to read the comment in full. I think it's great to be able to use language that is a little bit more like inviting the student in versus calling them out. And so a way that I've invited students in is by being like, hey, um, math was never my strong suit. Like, I definitely struggled in calculus while I was here. And something that I found to be really helpful was not only going to office hours, just so I could have a bit more one-on-one time with my professor, but engaging in the free tutoring that the Drama Center offers. Definitely want to take advantage of those resources, if they're there and they're available. And it might be that having someone explain it to you in a different way could be incredibly beneficial. Um, and seeking out that additional help is actually a strength and not a weakness. And so helping the student to reframe that would be really good. And thanking them for even mentioning that, struggling academically is something that is going on, and acknowledging that the quarter system definitely takes some time to get used to because it's an adjustment to be taking a midterm during your third week of a class. And so I think normalizing that is also going to be really helpful for your student. And asking the student, like, what things maybe have you tried outside of the classroom, to try and close that gap, and then asking the student like if they're open to hearing some suggestions or some resources that exist because you were able to attend this webinar. So the Drama Center is great, office hours are great, and study groups with their peers that they create on their own would also be really helpful. Um,
Do you want to take on the next one?
yes, Jose, thank you for this. I love, love, love that your student is attending mass and, playing sports. That's definitely a way to help build community. I love encouraging students to get involved in things on campus, both religious and otherwise. And so campus ministry has a really huge presence on our campus, and all of the different residential learning communities have a spirituality facilitator. They're all grad students here on campus, that help bring that spirituality component into the RLCs. They do it in a way that's not pushy or forceful at all, but that just really helps students feel more at home, a greater sense of community, and if they want a space to talk about spirituality or religion, they definitely know that they have one. And so that I've found to be very, very helpful. And the spirituality facilitators also put on programs within the residence halls, and they also host what are called hospitality hours, where for 1 or 2 hours a week, they'll either go to a common space or have their apartment open, and they'll provide like baked goods or a fun activity for students to do. And it's just a way for students to feel a little bit less lonely during the transition. And so that's something that I've always really valued that we do here on campus.
Before I go into my list of questions, does anyone want to chime in with one of their own? If not, totally acceptable. I can ask one of mine. I just don't want to dominate the conversation. All right, cool. Um, since mental health can be perceived a certain way, students don't typically seek out help even though they may need it.
Mhm.
Um, how can parents advise their students to do so, or is there a way um, for people to request you all to check in on their students?
Yes, yes, yes. There are definitely times where students kind of need a warm handoff. And so something that's really helpful is when I've had students' friends recommend them to come see me or the other therapist in residence. Sometimes the faculty director or the resident director will email the student and be like, oh, hey, I've copied Kristen or Justin or Melba or Mitch on this email. I think that they'd be really helpful in helping you work through some of like your anxiety or your stress or you adjusting to being on campus. If a parent reaches out to me, technically we're not allowed to respond because of HIPAA. If I like I can't confirm that I know your student or that I've seen your student unless your student is seeing me and has given me permission to do so. However, if a parent were to email us asking just like a general question like, "Hey, I'm looking for tips and tools on how to best support my student," we can answer those kinds of things. Um, if you have a student that is struggling, I'm seeing the chat right now with anxiety, a student could certainly just reach out to me via email, especially if they don't see a time that works for them in the health center portal. All of us therapists and residents have moved things around in our schedule to just make something fit for a student, usually within the same week. And so I just did that on Friday. Like I saw a client at a time slot that I am never seeing clients on a Friday. I'm not a morning person. Stephen could tell you I'm more of like an afternoon and evening girl. And I could just tell by the way that the student was emailing me and the verbiage in the email that he really needed to see someone like that week. And I looked at the other therapist and resident schedules, and none of us really had anything that worked because we were either booked or just had times that conflicted with his class schedule. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll meet you at 9:30 a.m. Like, do you like dogs? I can bring mine to session. And that's what time I saw him. And we have a follow-up session this week. And we really do our best to meet students where they are. And as Jeannie Rosenberger, our provost or vice provost would say, providing like mental health support for every student is really important to us. And so we're down to be flexible if they're down to reach out. And so if you have a student that is looking to see someone, please feel free to just have them reach out to me. And if for some reason I'm not available, or maybe they're looking for someone with like different identities or different focus points, I'm still happy to just bridge that gap and help connect them with who they need to be connected to.
Awesome. Between each question, I'm just gonna pause in case anyone wants to jump in. Um, but let's go with what's the best way to support an introverted student in finding help and resources they need, right? So we just talked about um, a broad some broad advice about how students can seek support, but what if again they're more on the shy side of things?
Yeah. I think reminding them that they don't have to go to the health center. I think a lot of students find that the health center is like intimidating, and it's also very like fishbowl if you're waiting in the waiting room and you're seeing other students walk in and it's like, oh, like so and so's ready for you. And it just seems a little bit more, I don't know, like exposed is probably the word that I'm looking for. And reminding them that if they email their therapist in residence or any therapist in residence, there are a million and one reasons why students come to see us in our offices within the residence halls. Like maybe a student's just seeing us because we're collaborating on a program that we're doing together, or maybe a student is seeing us because they just are interested in applying to grad school for psych and wanted to talk to someone about it. No one assumes that someone seeing me in my therapist in residence office is because they're like in a state of panic about something. And so I think reminding them that they can just walk down the hall once they've made their appointment. And I compare it to kind of like curling up in a living room or a family room, like curl up in this comfortable armchair, play with this fidget toy, maybe have my dog in your lap if he's in, the office with me that day. And it's not even committing to doing therapy full time. It's just a consultation, a conversation with someone that is willing to create space to understand you and hear you out. And then if you decide at the end of that that you do want to start going to therapy more regularly, then that's something that they can help you with. And so I think explaining that to an introvert helps take some of that pressure off. Um, and also in terms of just getting more involved on campus, I think just encouraging them to go to one program a week within their residence hall because that's protected. They're going to see familiar faces that they're seeing every day in the hallways and in the bathrooms if they're in a more traditional dorm. People that they're probably seeing in classes because some students are in classes based around their RLC or their residential learning community. So one program a week within their residence hall is a really good starting point. And at that program, they might meet, the person that's supposed to be their best friend. And another great thing for an introvert is if you think that your student is in a position where they could balance like an on-campus job, um, meeting friends through work is just like great and it kind of happens by default. And so even if they were just working at like the front desk of a dorm or one of our offices on campus that has like student workers, like the housing office or something like that, you're by default just interacting with a few other students that are doing the exact same kind of work as you are. And I found that to be like a less intimidating way for some of our introverted students to get better connected and feel a greater sense of community. I'm reading a message. Give me 1 second, Steven.
No worries.
Okay. Um, for an introverted student, who's doing some struggling to fit in, um, neurodivergent, and also a minority, I think this is where those student or the groups, the support groups on campus would be really helpful. And also if we're saying minority in terms of like ethnically, then the MCC, the Multicultural Center, is a really great place to go on campus. There's so many affinity groups there that have weekly meetings, and you don't have to be part of that group to attend those meetings or be part of those clubs. However, I found that a lot of the minority students that I see have found really great community within the MCC. Um, and there's also the Office of Multicultural Learning if they're looking for like some capital A adult support on campus. And that's been a great space for students to feel better connected. Um, and then there's also going to be organizations based on major or field of study. And so there's definitely groups specifically for engineering, groups for psychology, groups for ethnic studies. And so encouraging them to talk to their advisor about ways to get connected, that would be really great as well. To incorrect student parent expectations may cause mental health issues. Um, yes, incorrect student and parent expectations can certainly contribute to mental health issues. I've definitely had students that are crying in my office because, maybe their parents are screaming at them because they aren't making straight A's anymore. Um, and the coursework is more rigorous here, and maybe they got their first B, or maybe even their first C, or maybe they needed to withdraw from a class because they weren't able to grasp the material and balance it with everything else that they were doing. And I definitely can empathize with both sides. I understand a parent being frustrated if they're used to their student performing in a certain capacity. Um, Also, your student has never been in college before. And so I think that that's important to remember as well. And then sometimes the issues are not because of any parent pressure. And sometimes the students are applying that pressure to themselves because they're used to performing a certain way. And maybe they were the valedictorian of their class. And then all of a sudden they're struggling to keep a B in their organic chemistry class. And I think a lot of the work that we do with our students is reframing and reminding students that it's not about perfection as much as it's about progression. So, are you moving in the right direction? Are you utilizing all of your resources? Are you maximizing your efforts? Um, and reminding them that once they have their capital A adult job, no one's going to, thank God, no one asked me what I got in my calculus class when I was here at Santa Clara. Like, that's not what I'm talking about in session as a therapist. And so, removing some of those expectations from themselves and removing some of that pressure, I often will ask students, well, what we're currently worried about, will it matter in like 10 years? Will it matter in 5 years? Will it matter in 1 year? And kind of breaking it down that way. And maybe it will matter in a year because maybe they're thinking about applying to graduate programs. So it's like, okay, well, then how can we, do some work on this? But if it's something that won't matter at any of those points in time, you'll kind of start to see the students' shoulders drop like, oh, maybe I'm making a bigger deal of this than it really needs to be. But removing expectations or minimizing them, minimizing the expectations is certainly going to be helpful in your students dealing with this already complex period of adjustment. Thanks for that, Jose.
Anyone have a burning question? Great. Um, sometimes when I communicate with parents, I learn that they have difficulties holding space for their students' emotions. When their student calls them panicked and, all the thoughts are kind of just being shouted at the parent wants the help. Do you have any advice for what parents should do in a situation like that?
Hmm. I think one of the big things is like remaining calm. I think that sometimes things that we've been seeing, especially this year with the roommate conflicts, actually, is like when a parent notices that their child is in distress, sometimes they meet their child with a similar energy. And I think that oftentimes it's important to remember that for your student, you're kind of like their North Star. So if they see you conducting yourself in a certain way, then they'll kind of follow suit in some ways, or at least be a bit more regulated when that's the case. And so I think remembering that if you're exuding a calming energy, then it is more likely that your child will also exude that calm energy, or at least not be even more heightened than they were when they initially sought you out for like help or assistance. Um, and then it's also okay if you don't know the answer to something. And I think it's good. I remind myself of that as a therapist. I think it's also good to remind yourself of that as a parent. Like maybe there's something that you don't have an immediate answer for, and it's okay to be like, I haven't experienced that, and I certainly will like, help you find the resources that you need. Or that's not something that I can say that I've personally gone through, yet I totally empathize and understand that you're saying that this is really difficult for you. And being able to meet your student in that capacity goes a really long way. I'm reading a message. Okay, so this one is about advice on encouraging students to build an exercise routine that would support mental health, ADHD, and physical health. They know it would be healthy, but they can't seem to plan or do it, and they do have time in their schedule. Um, Something that I personally found useful, I actually did this for myself this summer, was I identified three gym partners. And the reason why I chose three is because I work out with a personal trainer doing like strength training with weights 3 days a week, but I really do not enjoy cardio at all. And I knew that I needed to be doing more cardio. And I knew that if I just picked one cardio partner, it's really easy to be like, oh, hey, Steven, I know we said we're going to work out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but like, I'm too tired Monday. I'll see you Wednesday or I'll see you Friday. But I knew that if I had a couple of different partners, I wouldn't cancel on the one time that I was going to be able to see them that week. And so it felt like I was getting both cardio in and like some social interaction that I wouldn't get ordinarily. And so I'm scheduled for the entire summer, like cardio with Jocelyn every Tuesday, cardio with Brianna every Thursday. And then my friend Maureen and I would kind of rotate between Monday, Wednesday, or Friday of each week, just depending on our work schedules and what worked. But we mapped them out for June through September. And it was a great way for me to both feel connected and feel movement in my body and just like be a bit more regulated. A good way to actually help your student do this too would be to have your student map out each hour of their day that they're awake, including time for fun things. And when students can visually see, I'll often do this in a color-coded way on the whiteboard in my office. But when they see that they have like 3 free hours each day or 4 free hours each day that aren't being utilized, it then does not seem so wild to maybe plug in a 1 hour slot or a 45-minute slot to do something physical. Um, and I think a good goal would be more days a week than not. And so, um, committing to maybe 4 days a week is a really great place to be, and moving from there. And reminding them of the benefits of how good they will feel once they actually do it. I think some of the biggest struggle is just getting there. But how good you feel after you've done the workout certainly makes it worth it. And all of the other positive effects regarding mental health and the ADHD piece too are huge. Um, any advice for homesickness, especially if home is not far away? I would say that, oh, and I said this in our last webinar. Um, I was, Stephen kind of laughed. I explain to students sometimes, I'll ask them first, how long did it take you to feel fully acclimated in your high school setting? And oftentimes students will tell me, oh, well, I feel like I had a handle on things by like the end of freshman year, or by the time I hit sophomore year, I felt good and I felt connected and I felt a sense of community. And then I'll look at a calendar and I'll be like, okay, today is October 21st. The first day of school was September 22nd. We've been here for a little less than a month. It is totally normal to not feel like Santa Clara is home yet because you're still learning Santa Clara and Santa Clara is still learning you. And so, the same way that when a baby comes home from the hospital, it takes months or sometimes even a year for, that baby to get used to being in this new environment, and learning all of the things that the world has to offer. And starting college is kind of the same thing. You're like this baby in this new environment. And so, being able to sit with the homesickness and realize that it's feelings of being uncomfortable and not being unsafe is really huge. And then having pieces of home in your space definitely helps. Like, is your room decorated in the way that makes you feel like nested and makes you feel like excited to be in that space? Could someone from home maybe teach your student how to cook something specific that makes them feel like they're a little bit more at home? Um, do they have maybe like scheduled phone calls or FaceTimes a couple times a week with people that they're close with from home? And then if they live close to home, maybe committing to just like one Sunday a month or something where they're home for family dinner. Um, so they're not missing out on the full college experience, but still getting that little dose of home that would be helpful for them to, kind of bridge that gap because it is weird going from living somewhere your entire life to all of a sudden being in a completely different environment. You kind of feel like a fish out of the water. So I think being sure that we're not minimizing the homesickness is also really important. However, challenging them to remain in this environment because it is a really good one.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. I have two more questions if no one has anything. One's the quick logistical one. What's the best way to support an introverted student? Nope, sorry. Wrong one. What is the process for a student to begin counseling, and how often can they meet with a counselor?
There are two different routes that they can take. They can either call the health center and book what's called a phone consultation, and the therapist will talk to them and determine um, maybe what their route is or who they should be assigned to. And then within a week, they're beginning regular therapy. The other route is meeting in person or via Zoom with a therapist in residence, which is something that they can schedule themselves online, whether that's through their health center portal or via email. And then after meeting with us, we will determine whether they're going to meet with us regularly, or maybe there's someone in our health center that would be a better fit, and we'll get them connected. I actually was at that meeting right before this presentation. It's kind of like Hunger Games for clients. We present all of these cases that need to be assigned, and everyone is like trying to claim these different clients that they want to work with. We at CAPS see students on a bi-weekly basis, so either on like the odd or even weeks of the quarter. And if they are a California resident, we also will see them over winter break, and over like spring break and even over summer, as long as they're on California soil. We will still see them if they're still needing clinical care. And the only weeks that there are exceptions to that, I think, are just like Christmas week. And then, of course, any of like the major holidays that the entire university shut down. But outside of that, there are students that I've seen like as late as like December 20th, and then saw them right again as soon as the new year started back, and all school year and all summer. So that's a good way to get them scheduled.
Great. And lastly, with our 2 minutes, what is one final piece of advice you'd like to give our families as they continue to support their student throughout the year?
I would say to be gentle with yourselves as their parents and to be gentle with your students as they're transitioning and getting adjusted. I think sometimes we forget to give ourselves the TLC that we're willing to give other people. And so I'd like you to think of your favorite person that is not your family member and think of if they were telling you some of the things that are currently plaguing you right now, like if they were sharing those exact things with you. What kind of love and tenderness would you offer them? If you can channel even a fraction of that into yourself, you'd be in a really good space. Um, Steven's going to share my information with all of you. It was really great to connect virtually today, and I look forward to supporting your students and hope that you have a great rest of the week. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. That concludes our webinar. I'm just addressing some last minute things in the chat, but feel free to drop off. Yeah,
And Steven, I can stay on for another 5 if needed. Just let me know.
sounds good. We'll kind of
Okay.
base it off our audience, but I think we're good. I'm gonna end the recording and
Okay.
thank you all again for joining.